Well, hi everyone. My name is Jeff Bartley, and I am a Principal Solutions Architect here at AWS, covering some of our hybrid cloud storage and data transfer services. And I'm really excited to talk to you today about AWS DataSync and how it's helping our customers migrate their data and their storage up into AWS. So as I go out and I talk to customers, I frequently hear the question that, Jeff, I have data on premises. I want to get it into AWS. Where do I start? What do I use? And AWS has a lot of different options to help our customers move their data into AWS, whether we're looking at Snowball Edge or a snow cone device, or whether you're looking at AWS Transfer Family for SFTP or FTP or FTPS, or S3 Transfer Acceleration. We have a wealth of opportunities that customers can use to move their data. Today, we're going to talk about a specific service, AWS DataSync, and how it helps customers move their data online into AWS. Now, specifically, what we're going to do is we're going to start with an overview of DataSync. We'll talk about what it is and how it works. And then we'll go into talking about on-premises migrations with DataSync and how those work and some of the different use cases that our customers are doing. We'll go through a customer use case with Autodesk. So Autodesk was one of our early customers with DataSync, had a great experience there. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about some migration tips. So when you're using DataSync to migrate your data, some tips for that. And then we'll finish off with some things you can look at to get started with the service. So frequently when I go out and I talk to customers about DataSync, frequently what happens is that the conversation starts with tools that they've built on their own, or maybe open source tools, and they've moved a few files here and there, and then they begin to discover that there are some challenges, particularly as they begin to try to scale up. When you're looking at like hundreds of terabytes or even petabytes of data, or millions or even billions of files, you're starting to look at scales that introduce a lot of issues that you need to start thinking about. Things like, well, how do I manage my performance? What about encryption of my data? How do I validate my data end to end? And what about dealing with all the overhead of managing some of these solutions that I'm trying to build, or open source solutions that I'm using? It's a lot to think about. And so our customers came to us with this challenge, and we built AWS DataSync, which is an online data transfer service that helps our customers simply and securely move their data between AWS storage services and on-premises, as well as between AWS storage services within the cloud. And DataSync has a number of features built into it that make it ideal for these use cases, like built-in scheduling, encryption, data validation, as well as granular monitoring control over your tasks as they're transferring their data. DataSync is built to be easy to use. It's built to be fast, secure, and reliable, and it's designed to be low cost, especially when compared to a number of the open source commercial tools that are out there today. So when our customers get started with DataSync, they're typically starting from a standpoint where they want to move data from their on-premises environment into AWS. And they start by deploying a DataSync agent into their environment, connecting it to their on-premises storage, and then migrating it into one of the storage services that DataSync supports, which is Amazon S3, Amazon EFS, or Amazon FSx for Windows File Server. Now, earlier this year, we also launched the AWS Snow Cone device, which is a small, portable, ruggedized device that helps customers collect and process data outside of traditional data center environments. And the cool thing about this device is that it comes with the DataSync agent built in. So customers can collect their data onto the device and then use DataSync to copy that data up into the AWS cloud for further processing or analysis, and all without having to send the device back to us. And then we also have a lot of customers who use DataSync to transfer data between storage services in the cloud. So customers who want to make a copy of their EFS file system, or who want to replicate their FSx file system from one region to another. And we recently launched a feature that allows customers to do this all without deploying in-cloud infrastructure. It makes it really easy to transfer data between your AWS storage services. And then finally, earlier this year, we also launched Amazon S3 on Outposts, which allows our customers to access storage in their Outposts environment using the same APIs as they would when accessing their S3 buckets up in AWS. And using DataSync, you can copy data between your S3 on Outpost storage and your buckets running in the cloud. So when we're out talking to customers, we typically find that there are 4 use cases that they're using DataSync for. The first of these is migrating their application data up into the cloud. So a lot of applications out there use data that's stored on shared storage, whether that's shared file systems or object storage. And our customers, when they're migrating their applications into AWS, they also need to bring this data with them. And so they're using DataSync to migrate data from their on-premises file shares or object storage up into AWS. Second use case is for customers who have cold data on premises. This is data that's not being accessed very often, and customers are looking to free up their on-premises storage and bring that data into AWS for long-term archiving. And frequently, they're using DataSync to copy data into Amazon S3 Glacier or Glacier Deep Archive to be able to take advantage of the high durability and low cost that those storage classes provide. And then once they've moved that data into AWS, it then frees up that storage and in some cases allows them to even shut that storage down and free up capacity in their data centers. Then a third use case is customers who are looking to replicate their data from their on-premises environments up into AWS, either to make a second copy of that data for protection or maybe for disaster recovery purposes. And then finally, another use case that we see customers using DataSync for is when they need to bring data from their on-premises environments up into AWS for further processing or analytics. And a good example of this is customers, I work with a lot of customers in the life sciences industry who have genome sequencers or other devices on premises that are generating a lot of data. And these customers want to bring that data up into AWS, process it, get the results, and then bring those results back on premises for their scientists and researchers to do further analysis on. And customers are using DataSync to copy that data up into the cloud and then bring it back down. So DataSync offers a number of benefits to our customers, and the first, of course, is around performance. Customers, when they're moving data, they want to be able to move it as quickly as possible. And DataSync has a number of features that enable this. And the first is that it uses a custom-built protocol that's designed to transfer data in parallel over your network, maximizing the bandwidth that's available to DataSync. DataSync always does incremental data transfer, so it only transfers the data that needs to be copied. And you can scale up DataSync by adding more agents and being able to process more data. Secondly is that DataSync is designed to be easy to use. So as I mentioned earlier, it comes built in with scheduling. You can use filters to design what kind of data you want to copy. And then you can also control the bandwidth throttling on DataSync. And we recently launched a really cool feature around this that allows customers to change how much bandwidth DataSync is using while a task is running. So you can imagine a use case where a customer might have a DataSync task running, and during the day they want to limit how much bandwidth DataSync consumes during business hours, but then at night, during off hours, they might ramp up the amount of bandwidth that DataSync is allowed to use. So really cool feature. DataSync, of course, is built to be secure. Security is our top priority here at AWS. And with DataSync, it securely accesses our AWS storage services. It has VPC and FIPS endpoints to provide secure access to your data. It encrypts data in flight and also does data validation both in flight and at rest. And DataSync integrates with a number of our managed services for both management and monitoring, and we're able to integrate with our storage services by directly communicating with our storage classes in S3. And then finally, DataSync is designed to be cost effective. So it's 1.25 cents per gigabyte of data transferred, and you only pay for the data that you transferred, and there's no minimums. So as I mentioned, DataSync integrates with a lot of our AWS services, whether it's on the networking side with VPC endpoints or private link. DataSync can work over Direct Connect. From a management and monitoring perspective, we integrate with CloudWatch and CloudTrail. And then we also use IAM for securing access to resources. And then I mentioned a number of the storage services that AWS DataSync integrates with today, whether it's Amazon S3, Glacier Deep Archive, S3 on Outposts, FSX for Windows File Server, EFS, or even AWS Snowcone. And DataSync is available today in 22 AWS regions around the world, and we're continually adding support for more regions as they come online. So how do you actually use DataSync? So if you're using DataSync on premises, the first step is that you deploy your agent. And an agent can be deployed in your data center in a virtual machine environment. We support VMware, Hyper-V, or KVM. And then that agent communicates with your on-premises storage through the NFS, SMB, or S3 API if you have object storage that supports that protocol. If you're using DataSync to copy data from an Outpost environment, your S3 on Outpost environment, then you would deploy DataSync agent as an EC2 instance in your Outpost environment. And then once you've deployed your agent, you then define locations. And locations are where you're copying your data from, that's a source location, and where you're copying your data to, which is a destination location. You then create a task and you start that task. And then the DataSync managed service is responsible for moving the data and connecting securely to the AWS storage services up in the cloud. And as I mentioned already, when you're copying data from your on-premises environments up into AWS, DataSync can utilize either a public internet connection, or it can use Direct Connect, or through a VPN. And regardless of which method you use, DataSync always encrypts data in flight using TLS. And as we've already seen, there's a number of ways to deploy and configure DataSync. And so the first is when you're copying data from on-premises up into AWS. I mentioned on-premises, we support NFS, SMB, or object storage systems using the S3 API. And you can copy that data up into AWS to Amazon S3, EFS, or FSX for Windows File Server, and utilize agents to connect to your on-premises storage systems. If you're copying between AWS managed storage services, so like EFS to EFS, or maybe S3 to FSX for Windows File Server, any combination of those, no agent is required. You can just simply go into the console or using the API or CLI, create a task, specify your locations, and off you go. And then if you're deploying in an Outpost environment, remember that the agent runs as an EC2 instance in your Outposts. And then if you're using a Snowcone device, remember that the agent is built into the Snowcone device, and you would connect to the NFS server that's running on the Snowcone device itself. It'll copy from that, and then it'll copy it up to any of our managed storage services running in AWS. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about how customers are using DataSync specifically to migrate their data up into AWS. So first, let's talk about some of the specific benefits that AWS DataSync brings to migration. And the first of these is that, as I've already mentioned, it has built-in verification and encryption. So all data is encrypted in flight using TLS. And then we also do data validation, both in flight and at rest. And the way this works is that when we read data from the source, we compute a checksum on that data. And as the data is transferred over the network, we then validate that it was received using the checksum on the other end. And then we also have options for validating data as it's written to the destination storage to make sure that all data is written byte for byte from the source to the destination. DataSync also has built-in error handling. So if your DataSync frequently is copying data over long area networks, we have a lot of customers where their data centers are not necessarily geographically close to AWS regions. And so DataSync is built to deal with some of the networking challenges that can come up, things like drop packets or TCP retransmits or retries or things like that. DataSync will automatically retry and recover from many of those networking issues that can arise. DataSync, again, is designed to be easy to use, so we really designed it to require minimal setup and configuration. If you're deploying on premises, it's just simply setting up an agent, activating that agent, and then setting up your source and destination locations and starting your task. And if you're copying between AWS storage services, as I mentioned, you don't even need an agent now. So it's that much easier to use. It's built for high performance. We've talked about this a little bit, but it does parallel copies of data to maximize your network bandwidth. And in fact, a single DataSync agent can copy data up to 10 gigabits per second if your network bandwidth is available for that. And I've got a number of customers who have used DataSync to copy data at 100 terabytes a day of data or more. And finally, as I've also mentioned, DataSync is always doing incremental transfers. And the reason is because every time you run a DataSync task, it scans the source, it scans the destination, and it compares them. And it only sends the data that it needs to from the source to the destination. So it's always doing incremental transfers. Okay, so now let's talk about why customers are migrating to some of the storage services that we support. So the first of these is Amazon S3. And if you're familiar with our S3 service, you know that it is highly scalable, highly durable, 11 nines of durability, provides a lot of flexibility in how customers want to store their data. So customers can choose from a number of storage classes, anywhere from S3 standard to intelligent tiering to Glacier Deep Archive, and a number of others. And it really gives customers the control and flexibility of how they want to store their data, and based upon how often it needs to be accessed and the kind of access that they need to make to it. And so DataSync supports all of those storage classes. And DataSync also has built-in capabilities for optimizing how data is transferred to S3, as well as how it's verified. And as I've already mentioned, you can use DataSync to copy directly into any S3 storage class. So this could, this helps customers who are looking to save money, let's say on lifecycle costs. You don't have to copy into S3 standard first and then lifecycle into Glacier. You can just go directly into Glacier or Glacier Deep Archive using DataSync. Customers are also using DataSync to migrate to EFS. So frequently they're migrating from their on-premises NFS shares or Linux servers, and they're bringing that data into EFS. Again, EFS is a highly scalable, highly durable in-cloud file system. It's redundant across multiple availability zones and provides a lot of flexibility for customers who need to access data from their Linux machines or other machines that need to access to NFS data. EFS also provides a number of capabilities around compute integration. So besides being able to access an EFS file system using EC2, customers can also use Lambda to access data in EFS, and they can also use our container services as well. So we have a lot of customers using EFS's shared file storage for their containerized environments. DataSync, when you use DataSync to copy data to EFS, it will always copy POSIX metadata. So there's things like user ID, group ID, permissions, timestamps, things like that. DataSync will copy that data up into EFS to make sure that all the permissions that you set up on your source are copied into the destination. And again, DataSync integrates very deeply with the EFS file system and service to make sure that we're accessing it securely and effectively. We've also have a lot of customers migrating their on-premises SMB shares or Windows servers up into FSX for Windows File Server, which is a fully managed Windows storage environment. And FSX has a lot of capabilities around backup and deduplication. It also has a lot of options around how to configure your storage. So you can create SSD configurations or HDD configurations for lower cost. and also gives you options for how you want to configure the performance of your FSx file system. So FSx gives customers a lot of flexibility in how they want to store and access their data in AWS. And similar to EFS, when you use DataSync with FSx or Windows File Server, it copies over all the necessary metadata, things like NTFS, ACLs, permissions, ownership, timestamps, all the metadata that you would expect to be brought over. And then DataSync also supports the SMB2 and SMB3 protocols, which are very common among most of the Windows systems that are out there today. And Autodesk was a customer who used DataSync early on. So Autodesk, if you're familiar with them, they are a software company. They build software for manufacturing, engineering, architecture, media type industries. And they had an on-premises data domain environment. And this system was starting to age out, and Autodesk wanted to bring that data into the cloud. But they needed to retain that data for a long time. And so they were looking for ways to bring these petabytes of data up into AWS. They liked Amazon S3. They liked the scalability and the durability. And so they wanted to bring their data into S3. And so they chose DataSync. And using DataSync, they were able to move their data quickly and securely with full byte-for-byte validation of their data, which they had struggled with previously with other tools that they had built for this. And in fact, they moved it so quickly that within a matter of months, they were able to validate their data, had landed into S3, and they were able to shut down and completely decommission their data domain environment. And they were so excited about the capabilities that DataSync brought to them that they wrote a blog for us. And in fact, if you go to our AWS storage blog and you search for Autodesk, you'll see the blog that they wrote that walks through their experience that they had with DataSync. All right, so now let's talk about a few tips that you can use for migrating your data using DataSync. So we talked a little bit about filtering. DataSync comes built in with filtering capabilities. We have both exclude and include filters. Exclude filters allow you to exclude data that you don't want to copy up into AWS. So you could set it on file patterns or directories or specific data that you just don't want DataSync to copy. And this is very useful in migration scenarios where customers have data that doesn't need to go up into the cloud. Maybe it's temporary data. It just doesn't need to be copied. And so DataSync gives them the ability to exclude data that shouldn't be copied. Now, on the other end, there's also include filters. And include filters help you to narrow the scope of what DataSync will scan and copy. So sometimes I work with customers who have data that's being updated on a recurring basis. And rather than having to scan their whole file system, which may have billions of files, they can use include filters to narrow down and copy only the data from folders or directories that have been updated on that particular day. And so include filters really make it easy for dynamic workflows where customers need to adjust the amount of data that they're copying on a regular basis. All right, and let's talk about a few more best practices with using DataSync. And so the first of these is to always remember to plan for your available network bandwidth. So sometimes I'll go in and I'll talk to customers and they'll ask me, well, Jeff, how long is this going to take? And so we'll talk about their network and what they have, and they may say, well, I've got a 10 gigabit per second network. And well, that's great, but half of it is being used for my business processes. So we can only plan for half of that bandwidth for their data transfer. And so always keep that in mind when you're planning your transfer. You're thinking about how long is this going to take. Make sure to plan for your available bandwidth. Talk to your network folks, see what that actually looks like on a day-to-day basis. The other thing is to always start small when you do your data transfers. Do a few tests. I think we've all been in this situation where we started a data transfer or a migration and realized halfway through that we missed a step and we have to start all over again. You don't want to have to go through that. So I always recommend that customers start small, maybe pick a directory, pick a few files, transfer those, make sure that the files landed as expected All the permissions were copied. There's no networking issues, things like that. And it also helps you get a good feel for what the transfer speed might look like. And then you build up, maybe add a few more directories, larger set of folders until you're comfortable with DataSync, that it's copying the data as you expect, and then you can hit that button and walk away and let it run. Another thing to remember with DataSync is that file size affects throughput. And so, if you're copying a lot of large files, DataSync is going to easily be able to maximize your network bandwidth. But if you're copying a lot of small files, then you're not going to necessarily be seeing a lot of high throughput with DataSync. Instead, what you'll see is higher files per second, and DataSync offers metrics for both of those. And so when you're copying your data, make sure if you see lower than expected throughput, check on the size of your files and see if you're seeing higher files per second. You might see in the hundreds or even thousands of files per second. Remember that with DataSync, you can scale out performance with multiple agents. So I have a lot of customers who maybe are migrating their file shares. They've got multiple file shares that they might want to migrate into AWS. And so what they'll do is they'll set up multiple agents and they'll create different tasks for each file share, and then they'll copy those in parallel, maximizing the available bandwidth that they have to DataSync. And then finally, remember that with EFS and FSX for Windows File Server, they both offer provision throughput capabilities where you can actually specify how much throughput you want the file system to be capable of using. And so, when you're migrating your data and you're copying your data into these file systems, you want to set that provision throughput fairly high so that you're not limiting your bandwidth. And then once the data is copied, you can then lower the provision throughput back to what you need for your day-to-day activities. All right, so let's wrap up with just some few things to get you started with DataSync. So it really is easy as 1, 2, 3. If you're copying from your on-premises environment, you just download the agent, deploy it in your environment as a virtual machine, and then activate it. And once it's activated, you then create your locations, create your task, and hit go. Start copying your data, and then you can monitor that copy in CloudWatch or using the DataSync console in the AWS Management Console. And if you're looking to get hands-on with DataSync, we've got a number of workshops that are out there free for anybody to access. You just head out to github.com and check out those two areas there, AWS samples. We've got a couple of workshops out there around DataSync that you can do to kind of play around with the service. We have one for NFS migration and another for FSX migration and a few others to take a look at. And then finally, head over to our DataSync product page at aws.amazon.com/datasync. There's a resources tab there. You just click on that and you can get access to blogs and videos and papers and other things that will dive a lot deeper into the service. And with that, I just want to say thank you. Hope you're having a great reInvent, and have a great day.